We are off into a new chapter now, and we're starting the nervous system, beginning with nervous tissues. And so this is chapter 11, part 1, page 388. We get the big overview here. The central nervous system and peripheral nervous system is something that we're going to be distinguishing and understanding. We have to learn the tissues first, but the big overview helps. And so I need you to understand that the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. Everything else is the peripheral nervous system. So when we say CNS, we mean central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. When we say peripheral PNS nervous system, we mean cranial nerves and spinal nerves, which ultimately lead to many other more locally occurring nerves. Now, the nerves are going to be also engaged in sort of Route 80 East, Route 80 West kind of activity where there's two directions. And so when you see a blue line, that in this case, that means that we're looking at sensory information. It's incoming. So sensory information is that information which comes in. And then motor information, depicted in the red line, is the information that leaves and goes out. Okay, so we need sensory information to understand what we're touching and also what we are seeing. Also, how does food feel in the stomach? Am I full yet? Am I hungry? These are sensory experiences. You might also be engaged in vision and hearing and taste, and so those are sensory. And then when you need to move something, now in the case of the stomach, we also have musculature, so that means we digest food, and that's an outflow, okay, activity. And it's a cranial nerve that does that, the vagus. We'll be learning about that. Okay, and then we have our skeletal muscle. We have our heart, which can be slowed down or speeded up by various innervations. Down here we have our bladder, and that too is going to be actually operated by some of the spinal nerves that come through the pelvic region. Okay, so this is the motor outflow here. It includes the entire autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic as well as the parasympathetic. Okay, there's a lot of functional activities that go on in an unconscious way in the autonomic nervous system. Okay, we'll get to that. Meanwhile, we have the individual cells of, these are actually sort of supportive characters right here. For instance, here's the neuron and as well as the vasculature here. You want your vasculature close to your neurons so that they get fed properly. And so we have these nice cells called astrocytes that represent sort of architectural cells that actually position the capillaries and the neurons close to one another so that we get the nice nutrient outflow and we get the metabolic waste uptake. Okay, just the way you like it. And then we get this one right here. This is actually a macrophage. It's called the microglial cell, and it's engaged actually in, how shall I say, phagocytosis. That is to say, cleaning up. So this is a white blood cell that derives from the monocytes, and actually when it leaves the bloodstream, we call it a macrophage. And when it gets specifically in the brain area or nervous system area, we call it a microglial cell. And it is involved in metabolizing breakdown of cells or pathogens, if a pathogen should enter the picture here. So this cell is very active. It breaks down cancer cells as well. Okay, then we have this group of cells here that reside inside the brain, actually, and provide flow because of the cilia, which are moving in rhythmic patterns in wave-like actions and move the cerebrospinal fluid through the ventricular system of the brain as well as the spinal cord. They're also responsible for taking the blood portion called the serum of the blood or the plasma and transforming it into the actual cerebrospinal fluid. So these cells transform themselves into what are called choroid plexes, which are sort of like capillary networks. So they have a lot of capabilities. These are the ependymal cells, right here, ependymal. And then we get to wrap our neurons with little electrical tape, as it were, inside the central nervous system and the brain itself. We get this type of myelin sheath here made of a particular cell. Do you see we have a cell here? And it reaches out and it actually wraps itself, quite literally, around the processes of neurons. And it actually increases the speed of the signal on the neuron. In the peripheral nervous system, we have these special little cells called Schwann cells, and they position themselves every so often. And it turns out that the electrical charge, or the EMF, is just strong enough to depolarize that part of the neuron right there. It's strong enough to be felt over here. Do you see that? And then it actually automatically, so we actually get a speedy signal jumping from node to node. That's the work of the Schwann cell in the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system can have neurons that are very long, right? And so from the tip of your toe, when you're checking out the temperature of the water in the ocean or the lake, that sensation of temperature is going to be traveling on one single neuron all the way to the spinal cord and up through the spinal cord to the base of the skull. One neuron. That's a very long neuron for something that's particularly of the microscopic persuasion. And so you need a little bit of speed there. If you were to touch something with your fingers on the hot stove and need to pull your hand away, it needs to travel quickly, right? So pain is often transmitted on neurons that are created to be moving fast, really fast. The peripheral nervous system also has sensory cell bodies. This is called a cell body. And it lives outside of the protection of the skull or the spinal column. Okay, so it's kind of in a sort of special spot where it has these little cells that live around it and protect it. Those are called satellite cells. Okay, so we have these at every level, spinal nerve level. We have lots and lots of neurons that make up the spinal nerves. And we have these little cells that protect the cell body. Okay, so then here is now a neuron just the way you like it. This neuron is called a multipolar neuron, fairly typical of the type of neurons that operate the muscles of your arms and legs. This is actually found in the spinal cord in certain places that we'll get familiar with. And usually it has a number of processes like this, all of which are bringing information in to what's called here the cell body. These are called dendrites. Okay, these are the processes that bring information in. And then there's one process in which the information goes outward, and that's called the axon. So, and you can always tell the axon. How can you tell? Under the microscope, is that as you look at the cytoplasm is very busy with dark staining little units here called Nissl bodies. But the axon hillock here is actually very clear and doesn't have any of these Nissl bodies, or they don't have any rough ER, which is what's it's actually manufacturing neurotransmitter here, just the way you like it. Okay, and also we have cell bodies that have rather large nuclei. Okay, so information always travels on dendrites toward the cell body, and then information travels away from the cell body along the axon. And oftentimes it's going to reach out and touch either a muscle or it's going to touch another neuron. And so we have out here the terminal branches. They're usually terminal axons. and they're going to secrete neurotransmitter. Here we have the scenario where we have a myelinated sheath. We have the impulse traveling in this direction, and basically it's moving quickly because it's moving from the node to node to node. These are referred to as nodes of Ranvier. Okay, and the myelin sheath is made out of these individual little Schwann cells here. Schwann cells are important for tissue repair in the neural persuasion, and we'll pick up more information about that very soon.